I'm a little awed by this amazing collection of human beings that are sitting in front of me, and I'm excited for you to meet them this morning and get to know a little about them. I'm actually not going to introduce you all. I'm going to ask you to do that because you're the best person to speak a little bit about who you are and why you are here. So Jamie, I'll start with you.
Okay, just making sure it works. My name is Jamie Schanbaum, and I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm currently 27. And when I was 20, I got meningitis, which was not that long ago. So I lived a full, healthy life until I was 20. And I still know what it's like. I remember the back of my hands, that phrase, as they say. So it's definitely affected me in a lot of different ways. Physically, obviously, emotionally, and I also learned a lot about meningitis afterwards. But we'll get more into that in our stories. But yeah, I survived meningitis in 2008. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Nick.
Thank you. First of all, everyone, I just want to thank everyone for coming out on this beautiful, sunny New York morning. I'm from New York. I moved out like 10 years ago, and every time I come here, it seems to rain, and it just makes me homesick. But when I was 14, I was attending a summer camp up in Western Massachusetts, and we had just finished a 3-day hike along the Appalachian Trail, where it was a group of 13 and 14-year-old boys and camp counselors. It was hot. We were hiking 10 miles a day. We were just sharing water bottles. We weren't thinking about anything. And we got back around dinner time, Thursday evening, started feeling kind of sick. Thought I had the flu. And, what do you do when you have the flu? You just relax. You wait it out. You let time take care of it. Chicken noodle soup. What's the old remedy? Over the course of the evening, symptoms got a little worse. Still no reason to panic. It wasn't until the next day around noon that all of a sudden I collapsed onto the floor, that it was like something is seriously wrong here. I was rushed to the hospital, where I spent the next 2 months in a coma fighting for my life. Every day was a battle. Something would go wrong, that was fixed. Another thing would go wrong. And my parents were amazed when they discovered that I had almost died from a disease that no one in my family knew about. No one in my family really had ever heard of. They had heard the term meningitis, but they really didn't know the details. They didn't know that it could take a healthy 14-year-old boy and in less than 20 hours have him on his deathbed. And they had no idea that there was a vaccine that could have prevented all this. Had they had known, of course I would have been protected. But that's why I'm really honored to be here speaking to you, because I survived, because I still have a voice. Like most New Yorkers, I love talking too. But it's really an honor to still have a voice and speak out on the importance of prevention and protection.
Thank you. Kumaran, talk to us a little bit about your work and what brings you here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. So I'm Kumaran Vadivelu. I come from Malaysia, and I got connected to meningitis during my early days when I was working in a hospital. As a young physician on call back in Kuala Lumpur General Hospital, meningitis is one word that I never wanted to hear. And my consultants in children's ward used to say, bacterial meningitis is one disease that no parent wants to see and no doctor wants to miss. It's a disease that's difficult to diagnose and hard to treat, and vaccination is the best defense against this deadly disease. And 8 years ago, I decided to move away from seeing individual patients at clinical level to join GSK when I saw the opportunity to be part of a global team working on solutions against diseases like meningitis, which could have much broader public health impact and making a difference at population level. Today, at GSK, I work at the intersection between vaccine innovation and patient health. And big part of my job today is to be out there to explain to people about the meningitis disease and what vaccines can do to make a difference, to help healthcare professionals and patients to better understand and also learn about the role of vaccines in this disease.
Fantastic. So we'll dive into a few more details on that in a second. But first of all, my Aussies represent, and it's such a pleasure to see you again. And
Two
have
of us
you.
in the same room.
I love it. So happy
and
to
a
have
Kiwi
you
down
here.
here.
Oh, yeah, we tolerate the Kiwi.
Yeah.
So tell us what brought you to this issue.
Well, I've been photographing children and mainly babies for the past 30 years, and I've had such a fortunate Korea. And when I was approached, I feel like I've been living in the world of meningitis awareness for the past 3 to 4 years, because I was first approached to do a series of images ranging from a 9-month-old baby to Jamie, who was 25 at the time, I think. So we travelled the world and photographed a lot of these survivors. And, I'm a mother myself. And I remember when our girls were small, we were living in New Zealand at the time, and there was a cluster of meningitis cases in Auckland. And there was a little girl in particular on Waiheke Island who lost all of her limbs, and she was under 2 years old. And our girls were sort of, 6 and 4 at the time. And I always remember how grateful we all were. This is pre-internet days and Skyping and Instagram and everything. I was so grateful that her family shared her story with everybody else as a warning to parents, because, as you'll hear today, the symptoms of meningitis can hide behind colds and flu. And so it made us hyper-aware as parents. And, as a mother, to be able to photograph all of these survivors, and in particular some new ones here today with the 6 images that we're going to reveal, it was just incredible to be involved with the families, to hear their stories, and to really be inspired by so many people. And, I feel like we're all family now, and, we're always in contact with each other and everything, because it's very, very personal stories that you're going to be hearing as well. So really, I'm just the messenger here, but a very happy one to be doing it.
Well, you're in a room of storytellers, and so that element of what we can do and how we can help amplify stories of you, Jamie, and Nick in particular is why we're all here. So, Jamie, I want to turn to you a little bit. Just talk us through, to the extent that you're comfortable, what happened, and really the impact that it's had on your life.
Yes, I can definitely do that. So my story starts out almost 8 years ago. I got sick in November, and being in Texas, the seasons don't really change until November. And that's, I was, kind of sick because the seasons are changing and the allergies. Anyway, so I was doing laundry at my friend's house, because that's what you do when you're a college student. If you don't have laundry, you go borrow your friends. So I'm over there, and we're hanging out with all her roommates, and I ended up not feeling well. I ended up taking a nap in her room, and it progressed to me eventually spending the night, because I was nauseous, I was vomiting. But I did notice something interesting that I didn't really think was important until I, recollected it. I noticed my limbs were really sensitive when I was touching the porcelain of me flushing the toilet or me washing my hands. It hurt. Same thing with my feet when I would walk on the tile floor. Since I was going to the bathroom so much, I eventually had to make a pallet on the ground because it was too painful. But of course, no one's thinking like, oh, this is meningitis, So I've definitely heard of, what is that symptom? Just sensitivity throughout my limbs. I'll get back to that in a minute. But the next morning, I ended up going home, and it was progressively worse. I wasn't capable of walking, basically. When people walk, they go 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm walking like 1 and holding myself up against the walls. I basically stopped going to the kitchen fridge to get water because the kitchen sink was closer. I stopped going to the kitchen sink because the bathroom sink was closer to get water. I was burying myself under blankets, and I couldn't retain any warmth. Luckily, my sister called me, which she never does, in the morning, especially to offer me a ride to school. And let me just add, I worked really hard to get to UT in Austin, and I couldn't even enjoy a full semester without contracting the disease. And so she was calling me, offering me a ride to school. I said, no, I think I need to go to the hospital. And she comes over, and it's not like I'm like opening the door, like, welcome, thank you for coming. I left it unlocked, and I was collapsed on the ground. But I was conscious. She assessed me. We both decided to go, and I didn't realize at the time, but that was the last time I walked with my legs. By the time I got to the hospital, I demanded a wheelchair because I couldn't walk at all. And I was in fetal position. I was freezing cold, and I was at a hospital, and I was like, oh, yeah, they'll fix it, whatever's happening. because we all hear these stories like how you are right now. This is my life. This is something that happened to me. And I had to deal with it because I didn't leave the hospital for 7 months. And within that time frame, the first couple of weeks, I was put in a semi-medicated coma, but I would wake up from time to time to see my limbs go from red rash to purple to black to literally rotting. I was half alive and half dead in some aspects. Like if you lifted up my blanket, it smelled like a dead person in the room. And I didn't have my amputations for another 3 months. So I had to deal with that for a while. And it's not like I was like getting up and playing with my hair. I was like a statue in bed. I wasn't capable of moving. I had nurses. I was dependent on nurses to roll my body to prevent bed sores. When I was leaving the hospital 7 months later, I was finally sitting up on my own. So meningitis definitely can have a toll on people. For me, I was very lucky. It could have been worse. I could have become mentally challenged, had become blind or deaf, had internal organ failures, where I'll be taking multiple pills every day just to sustain. And or amputations, which is something I had. And I just put my legs on every day, and I still feel very lucky to be where I am, especially with this platform, because like Nick was mentioning, it's great to have a voice about this, because I was walking onto college campus unvaccinated in a higher risk of catching the disease, and I didn't know it. So after that, I learned that not only am I trying to live my life again, but it could have been prevented. And that's something else you have to really take and swallow. And when I left the hospital, I was 80 pounds in a wheelchair, lost all of my hair, and was told to live my life and go back to school. So I didn't recognize myself when I got out. Luckily, I don't know, I just got more confident with time and learned my voice and really wanted people to learn about meningitis because I didn't know anything about it. And, thank you for being here also. It's also, I would like to say, a responsibility of y'all too, to share our story. Make sure you are doing the right thing and being proactive in the fight against meningitis. And currently there are 2 different vaccines that work together that fight against the 5 vaccine preventable groups. So definitely talk to your doctor. It can happen at any age. However, it's just at a greater risk for college students. So if you know anyone that's about to go to college, please insist that they get those vaccines. I don't want anyone to go through what I did. It was literally a nightmare experience. But very happy to be here today. I've been working with Anne for a couple of years now, and this year with GSK, talking about meningitis and how important it is to be vaccinated. So thank you, everyone that's here today, and questions will be later, I'm assuming.
So I want to get back to a little bit later about using your voices and how you're using your platforms. But Nick, talk us a little bit through your experience. You were also hospitalized for many months.
Yeah, I was in a hospital for a total of 10 months. And never thought I would say this, but I just wanted to get back to school. My parents never thought I would say that either. But when I first got hurt, so like I said, I was 14, and I was up in Western Massachusetts at a summer camp that really took pride in the fact that it was in the middle of nowhere. It was in the woods. It was secluded. That'll come into play a little bit later. But like I said, I had just finished hiking the Appalachian Trail. I was with all my cabin mates and counselors. There was 10 of us. Dinner time, all of a sudden, I don't want to say I felt sick. I felt very uncomfortable, though. I felt like the walls were closing in around me, just like I needed to get some fresh air. And this was around 6 o'clock Thursday evening. All of a sudden, next thing I know, I was passed out on a pool table underneath the mess hall, lying in a pool of my own vomit. And I was amazed at just how quickly I went from feeling fine to all of a sudden feeling like I just got hit by a bus. I went to the camp infirmary. While I was there, they diagnosed me with just a bad case of the flu. Now, kids get sick. It's kind of in our job description that kids are going to get sick. And I had had the flu before. I was overall a healthy kid, but I had had the flu a few times before. And I was just amazed at how strong and how quickly it had come on. The symptoms were very typical. Low-grade fever, vomiting, diarrhea, that very achy feeling in your joints that comes with having the flu. And like I said, the worst thing in my mind at this point was I'm a 14-year-old kid at summer camp. I just had to sit around and wait for 2 or 3 days until it passed. And that was really the worst case scenario. Just rested out, waited out. Didn't sleep much that evening. Next day, around noon, I went to go take a shower. I'm walking back from the shower, and just like Jamie said, it wasn't a very comfortable, natural stride. It was very kind of wobbling around, stumbling around, and then all of a sudden, boom, I collapsed. In the blink of an eye, from the mid-chest down, I was pins and needles. I couldn't feel anything. I mean, to this day, I still remember the feeling of my entire body pulsating from head to toe and just the absolute excruciating pain that I was in. Thought I was going through muscle spasms. In the time it took the nurse to go into the next room to get some Benadryl, someone to help me relax, and then come back, she had a look of sheer terror on her face because she looked down and saw little purple blotches beginning to appear on my abdomen. Now, this was probably the 18th, 19th hour that I had been fighting this disease that I really had no idea at the time. And these were the first telltale symptoms that this was something way more serious than the flu. And the nurse realized this kid is deathly ill. Called the ambulance. It took a half hour for an ambulance to come pick me up, and then another half hour to get to the hospital. And when I got to the hospital, the doctor who actually first met me, he wouldn't even admit me. This was a small mountainside medical clinic in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. They weren't prepared. They weren't trained to deal with something as serious as this. They were ready for stitches and concussions and broken bones, and he realized this. So he induced me into a coma and arranged to have me flown to a bigger hospital in a bigger city, Springfield, Mass., where they could actually treat me. But this is how dire he thought it was, and this is something that no family should ever have to go through. Before he induced me into a coma, he actually called my mother, and he held the phone up to my ear, and he said, "Nicholas, you have to tell your mother that you love her." Because he really thought in his heart that this was going to be the last time that a mother and a son would be able to share those words. And he realized that we had the right, we had the privilege to say goodbye. I mean, that's how bad it was. And that's the last thing I remember for months. I was induced to a coma. Once I got to Springfield, I had multiple organ failure. I had a fever that spiked to almost 108. They thought that my brain was just going to fry like an egg. My heart rate raised to over 300 beats a minute, and they just didn't know how my body could take it, especially being 14. Now, 3 weeks later, I had my amputations. Just like Jamie, my parents, I was in a coma, I was in La La Land, but my parents watched as my limbs, their only son's limbs, literally deteriorated, faded away, died in front of them. First they turned purple, then they turned black, and then they just rotted. Really paints a pretty picture when you look at it that way. Thank you. And when I woke up from a coma 2 months later, I remember my dad was by my bedside. It wasn't too far from here. It was over at New York Presbyterian Hospital on the east side. And I remember he told me what had happened. And from the minute I woke up from a coma, my family always reminded me, and they never let me forget, that the important thing wasn't what I had lost. The important thing is what I still had. And that was a full future. That was a life that could be anything I wanted to make of it. And with me, with my family, it was never a question of why did this happen? Why did this happen to us? It happened. It was in the past. There was only one thing to do, and that was move on. The bigger question is, if something is preventable, why does it keep happening? Why did it have to happen? And what can we do to use something terrible and something that could have ruined my life? And what can we do to actually use it for the better? To save lives, to make a difference? It's frustrating when you hear about how quickly this disease comes on, how so many people don't know what it even is. We live in an age where people think, well, I'm just going to go to the hospital and the doctor will, cure me and make me all better. But look at me. I was in the middle of nowhere. I was an hour from the closest hospital. What happens if you're traveling? What happens if you're hiking out west? What happens if you're on vacation over in Europe or Asia or Africa and you can't get to that hospital? I was lucky to have some fantastic medical attention as quickly as I could, and I still almost died from this disease. There's really, you don't treat it. You don't learn about it. You don't try to stay away from it. I mean, this is the most dangerous thing that ever happened to me in my life, and it was an invisible threat. The only thing that we have, the only fight that we have against this devastating disease is prevention. And I'm lucky to have survived. I saw how dangerous this can be. And because of that, that's why I am totally honored, absolutely honored and thrilled to be able to speak out about the importance of prevention, protection. Every parent wants to protect their child from all the terrors, all the horrors that are out there. Every parent wants to give their child every tool that they possibly could to successfully make it through life. And yet, there are still so many children out there who aren't protected from this. And that's why this is a fight that we will always keep moving forward with.
So Kumaran, talk to us about the vaccines and talk to us about this disease and talk to us about how many of us in this room are parents or many of us maybe are aunties and uncles to teenagers and emerging college students. What do we do?
So you heard from Jamie and Nick. They described how the disease has impacted their life and how terrible the disease can be. So meningococcal meningitis is one of the leading causes of bacterial meningitis around the world today. And there are 5 major serogroups that cause the disease, which are commonly known as meningitis A, C, W, Y, and meningitis B. The good news is vaccines are available today, and the vaccines against meningitis A, C, W, Y have been around since 1980s, and more recently, thanks to advancement in medical sciences and new vaccine technology, has enabled development of vaccines against meningitis B, which had been around for the last 2 years. As Jamie and Nick described, it's not only the patients who suffer from the terrible disease, even doctors who face the disease are put in a helpless situation because very little can be done due to the rapid progression of the disease. The disease can strike any individual, any person, but more commonly seen in young children, teenagers, and young adults, generally aged between 15 to 24. The disease spreads from one person to another via respiratory droplets or throat secretions, for example, coughing, sneezing, kissing, or sharing of drinking and eating utensils. And it's more common when people live in a crowded situation or there's a lot of close contact, especially as they described in colleges, etc. And today there are vaccines available to prevent this deadly disease against meningitis A, C, W, Y, and also meningitis B more recently since 2014. And the vaccines are available in US, example, and more than 70% have received vaccine against meningitis A, C, W, Y. However, less than 10% of the people have received the new vaccine against meningitis B.
And this is a vaccine that you have to request, isn't? Because I'm going to be a little bit impolitic over here, but I talked to my pediatrician recently, and he said, "Oh no, you don't need it." I'm like, wait a minute. So talk to me about that process. What do we do as advocates for the children in our lives?
Yes. So the vaccines are recommended by CDC, and the vaccines are also reimbursed. And the CDC recommends the vaccine ACWY for routine vaccination of all adolescents aged at 11 to 12 years for first dose, and a booster dose to be given between 16 to 18 years. Meningitis B is a new vaccine which was recommended as a category B, where the decision is left to the treating physician based on the risk factors to decide to vaccinate against this deadly meningitis B disease. And both of them are in the CDC recommendation schedule today.
But I think reading between the lines, we all need to advocate for our children with our medical professionals to get what we need. And in order to do that, we need to be informed. And you are doing incredible work in helping people get informed. So talk to us a little bit about, we have a surprise for you, as you can see.
Yeah, can I just tell you a little story that relates to what we were just talking about? When I was in Siena, Italy, a couple of years ago, I was speaking, we were raising awareness of meningitis. I see so many young people here today, and obviously there are a lot of parents who are here today. Please listen to this message. It's so, so important. And I spoke to a young mother who was part of an advocacy group in Siena who told me that she had lost her 18-month-old daughter a couple of years prior to that through the B strain of meningitis. And she said she was gone within hours. She was there happy at breakfast time, and by dinner time she was dead. And there's no mincing words here. And she said, the only thing that keeps me sane now is knowing that she was vaccinated against all of the other strains of meningitis, and this vaccine wasn't available at the time. So, and I spoke to the mother of 9-year-old twins from the UK. One got meningitis and has lost all of her limbs, and the other one is fine. And this is how random this disease is. And she spoke to me of standing at the end of her daughter's hospital bed screaming, "Don't die, don't die." And that's the reality of this. So, I know there's a lot of talk about anti-vaccinations out there, and, I was born in the 1950s. I remember lining up in the school hall for a polio vaccine. And that was when, mothers and fathers of our friends had suffered from polio. It's not that far in the past, and it's very, very important that we are all vigilant here. Please don't think it won't happen to you.
My aunt is a polio survivor, so I'm hearing you loudly and clearly here. So, Anne, I wonder if we could show the group some of the work that you've been doing to tell this meningitis story.
Yes, that's the best part of this show. I'll just briefly introduce you to some of these athletes. So this is a series of 6 images of athletes from all of these different countries holding babies up to the age of 6, 7 months to demonstrate the innocence and the purity and the vulnerability of these children and the need for them to be protected. So you'll recognise, of course, Nick, who's here, with tiny little baby Maxwell. And here we have Jamie with newborn Sienna, who was, I think, 14 days old at the time. Yeah? And this is Lenin. He's from Portugal. He recently competed in Rio, and he came 6th in his event. Lenin is a long jumper. And those 2 gorgeous little babies, Gabriella and Kendrick. And here we have beautiful Bibi Vaio. I don't know if any of you have been following the Paralympics. She's an Italian wheelchair fencer and who recently won gold in her event, so we're really, really thrilled about that. And little baby Vincent, who looks like he's sitting in this lovely armchair. I always thought he looked like he was straight off the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So beautiful. And he's Italian as well, which was just totally by accident because we did the shoot in New York. And this is Maddie, who's from Canada, and she's a track and field athlete. She's looking forward to competing in Tokyo. We want to see a few other people competing in Tokyo too. And their little baby's name is Charlotte. And then we have Sue Ellen, who's a runner, and obviously she's from Brazil, holding little Julian. So there's a very clear message, really, in all of this, and it's really, please, you know, the families of these babies are all behind it. All of the families who came to the shoot were so enthusiastic about getting the message across. So, you know, I'm just imploring you guys to be really vigilant and get the message out to as many parents as you can.
These are breathtaking, Anne. Thank you so much for sharing your gifts with us. The thing that I'm struck with about you, Jamie and Nick, is your power. You clearly, at some point, whether consciously or unconsciously, you made a decision that this is my new identity, and I'm going to kick some rear posterior with what I've got left. And so we're really grateful for the power and the energy that you bring to us today. I'd love to open up for questions, and just for a couple of minutes, and then I would love each of you to give us a final call to action. So friends, do you have any questions for our panelists? Yeah. If you state the question, then I'll repeat it so we can hear it on the recording.
So I know when you were talking about meningitis and vaccines and what's available, a lot of that comes from the perspective of obviously we're in a very privileged country that has a lot of that access. I know the representative of GSK talked about giving that access, providing that access to low-income countries. But middle-income countries struggle a lot with that disparity as well. How do we bring awareness and access to those areas where it's not being addressed?
So how do we bring access to vaccines where they're not currently being reached? Yep, okay. Kumaran, can you help us with that?
Yes. So access to vaccines, it's built on a couple of pillars. The first one is educating the people as well as healthcare professionals about the importance of the disease and the need for prevention. And the other pillars are affordability of this vaccine. And as Monsef spoke about earlier, so GSK practices tiered pricing policy to price the vaccine according to the country's affordability to pay, as well as their willingness to invest in public health programs. And these are the measures that GSK takes in order to make the vaccine accessible not just to the developed countries, but also the developing countries.
And I'll just add, Monsef, come.
Maybe just to build upon that, we have a tiered pricing system where we have 8 tiers that take into account the income into the country, the population, but also the commitment of the public health system to actually use and implement immunization and vaccination. And also one of the most challenging areas has been those countries who actually transition from being a least developed country into a middle income country. And we have announced about 2 years ago that we would commit for 10 years to continue to provide them with the lowest price, the same, because our number one priority has been to make sure that financial decision would not lead to the wrong immunization coverage decision, and I think that's the best we could do.
Any other questions? Please.
So, yes, you suffered from meningitis. Oh. Okay. Yes, you suffered from meningitis, but what got you to become para-athletes? Because that's like a whole nother level of commitment and physical that myself, I am not an athlete, that I was curious about because it's amazing.
I will go first. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't even know. So before I got sick, I was living in Austin, and Austin's a big bike community. And also as a kid growing up, I think when we first got our first bike, that was a good time. So I've always been, big bike person. When I was a college student, before I got sick, I was a commuter. I never really drove my car. I lived a mile off campus, biked every day, and did my grocery shopping and errands all on my bike. So when I was in the hospital, honestly, I didn't even think about being on my bike again because I was, half alive and half dead and a couple other things involved. So I wasn't really thinking about that. I was more so thinking about what my social life would be like. And And so I got sick in 2008, and then in 2009 I learned how to walk, and then in 2010 I got on my bicycle for the first time, and then in 2011 I became an international acclaimed cyclist and got on the U.S. Paralympic cycling team. So yeah, just saying that is just crazy to me still. But yeah, I'm very proud of myself. When it comes to that, I was very lucky. I met the right people at the right time. There was this guy there at one of my time trial events, and he's asking me questions about my bike and how it's adapted. And to answer that, so we have bikes, or our brakes are on the backside of the handlebars. So if I don't have fingers, how am I going to do that? They flip it towards me. So all I do is push into it. And he's asking me that because he's a U.S. Paralympic cycling coach, and he's wondering how I would qualify or be categorized on the team. And then lo and behold, I was at the U.S. National Championships and won gold in my division. And then I was on the team with him and competed with him in the 2011 Pan American Games in Guadalajara. It was definitely a really exciting experience. However, at the time, I was actually still in school. And so I took some time off to finish and graduate, and I graduated in 2014. And the president of our university spoke about me. I mean, there's been a lot of things that's been going on, and cycling has definitely been a good passion of mine. And I think it just brought me into a whole other level of high spirits, because to be in that nightmare situation to riding my bike with USA swag on, I mean, what a complete turnaround. So I'm very proud of myself, and Nick, take it away.
I had been an athlete my entire life. I started playing hockey when I was 5 years old. I always joked that before I lost my legs, I had lost all my teeth to hockey. I was a goalie. I wasn't the smartest kid. I didn't wear a helmet all the time. While this disease might have affected who I am on the outside, it was never going to change who I was on the inside, and I wasn't going to let it. And I identified as a hockey player, as an ice hockey player. It was my passion. It was my love. It's what I did. So after I got hurt, and they kept saying, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to learn how to drive? Do you want to learn how to walk again? I said, no, I want to play hockey again. That was really kind of one of my driving forces in getting my independence back and in getting my strength back. When I was 17, I was introduced to a sport called wheelchair rugby, which is full contact in wheelchairs. And like any athlete, once I started playing it, I wanted to get to the highest level I possibly could. Growing up, my dream was always to win a Stanley Cup, preferably with the New York Rangers, but they haven't won in a long time. That destroys me on the inside every day, too. But as an athlete, you always want to get to the top of that mountain. You always want to be on top of the podium. So when I started training full-time, when I became a full-time rugby player, I wanted to get to the Paralympics. When I was 23, I was really honored and fortunate enough to represent the United States in the Beijing Paralympics, where I was one of the starters, and the U.S. Paralympic team won a gold medal. And you're not going to clap? Come on. I remember being on top of that podium, and they put the gold medal around my neck, and I just remember the feeling of, this is a kid who 9 years before was fighting for his life in a hospital bed. This is a kid who, when he was 14, didn't have the strength to sit up for more than 5 minutes on his own. And now I was on top of the world with a Paralympic gold medal hanging from my neck. And then in 2012, again, I was fortunate enough to represent the United States in London, where we took a bronze medal. So really,
I got to try it on at the shoot.
I was really honored, really thrilled. And like I said, this disease was one that changed me and affected me so much on the outside, but it was never going to change who I was on the inside.
As we close out, my friends, give each of our guests here a call to action. Jamie, I'll start with you and work down the...
Yeah, so meningitis is definitely a passion of mine, considering that it could have been prevented. I actually have a nonprofit, and it's been around for about 7 years now, focusing on providing awareness on any level through educational tools to me presenting like I am today. And then eventually I got to have a law in Texas that for all college students in the state of Texas to be vaccinated, which is a huge achievement because there was no other state in the U.S. at that time that had that. So about 350,000 students each year in Texas are getting vaccinated, and the vaccine rates have gone up by 50% since 2011. So it's been a real honor. Thank you. And on a small note, I was actually an Uber driver last year, and living in Austin, there was a lot of college students, and they, they still didn't know what meningitis was, even though that they had to get the vaccine. So I still feel like my voice is necessary on any level, because even though you got the vaccine, people still don't know what it could lead to. I definitely want to be involved with other states when it comes to those call to actions, and I'm really honored to be speaking with everyone here today. So, don't take this lightly. Please prevent what's preventable, and thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jamie, I've told you I'm a parent, and there are a lot of parents in this room here. Look, just to put it bluntly, it's now preventable. If this happened to your child and they weren't vaccinated, you'd never be able to forgive yourself. So I think that's the most important message to get across here. Yeah.
Prevention, vaccinate. That is the only thing that we have in fighting meningitis. It really is. I talk to parents all the time who say, well, I hear this about vaccines. I hear that vaccines are bad because of this. The media loves talking about what vaccines can do in a negative way. But it doesn't talk enough about what not being vaccinated can do. And me and Jamie are both living, breathing examples of why vaccines are important. And like I said, at the end of the day, while this happened to us and while this was a very terrible thing, we're the lucky ones because we're still here. And, again, I just appreciate everyone coming out today, and please do go forth and help us in protecting other people all over the globe. Because if we won't, who will?
So new vaccine technologies has helped us to develop vaccines against these deadly disease. Vaccine discovery and research is only the first step towards fighting against this deadly disease. I think it's broader understanding and greater adoption of these vaccines are critical to continue to fight against the disease.
In your packets, your white folders, you have some more information. There's a link there to a Tumblr site where you can see these spectacular images and learn more. And we thank you so much for your time, your energy, your passion, and your power. Thank you.
Thank you.